In this video we're going to take a look at an introduction to jQuery, what it is, what it does, and why we should use it in our websites. Now, if you're looking to perform AJAX operations or cool effects in your website, and you are not completely familiar with JavaScript, jQuery is a really easy and flexible way to integrate things like effects, jQuery, operations, and so on into your website. Now, jQuery is essentially a JavaScript library that contains a variety of functions and other functionality that allow you to do this extremely easily. In the last part, we looked at an introduction to jQuery. However, let's go now on and look at an example that I've quickly written out. I'm going to go over to this tab in my browser, and you can see that we've got a paragraph of text here that just says you can see this paragraph. Now, I've created a button here which actually hides the paragraph and then allows the paragraph to be shown again. So this is probably an extreme, well, it's a simple example, but an effective example of how powerful and easy jQuery can be to use. Now, this is essentially going to hide the paragraph and then allow me to re-show it while changing the button text. So if I go ahead and click hide, you can see that the paragraph has been hidden. If I go ahead and now click show, you can see that the paragraph is shown again, and you'll notice that the button text changes as well. In this tutorial, we're going to look at implementing jQuery into a page and just testing if it actually works or not. So one of the things that we need to do first of all is go over to the jQuery.com homepage, and you'll see here that we can actually download jQuery. Now, there's a production and a development version, and you're going to need to choose the production version. The development version, you'll notice, is slightly larger. It's 229 KB, and this is uncompressed code. Now, the reason for this development version is if you are developing plugins and need access to the uncompressed code for jQuery. However, the production version is only 31 kilobytes and is minified and gzipped. Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to take a look at AJAX requests in jQuery. Now, we've already looked in previous part at GET and POST requests. However, what we're going to be doing now is performing an asynchronous HTTP request, which is an AJAX request. So we're going to go ahead and set up our page to look similar to what we did in the last parts of the tutorial, which were the GET and the POST. And we're going to create an input text area or an input field. Then we're going to create a button which is going to submit some data to a file. But we're going to be taking a look at the maximum and minimum widths and heights a bit later on anyway. Okay, so for the rest of the options, I'm going to remove the bigger box just so we can see everything a bit better. So I'm going to get rid of the bigger box from here. And now again, we're just left with the smaller box that we can still resize. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other options that we can define in here. Now, the first one we're going to look at is animate, and we can set this to either true or false. By default it's false. So what's going to happen here is when we drag, we don't actually see the drag happen, but when we release, it resizes to the size that you've defined. Now, there is a problem here that you can't actually see where you're dragging to. So I could, drag over here, and it'll animate nicely, but we can't actually see where we are actually dragging it to before it animates. So to fix this, we use the ghost option, and by default this is set to false, but now we're going to set it to true. We'll actually see a lower opacity version of the div that you are, or the element that you are resizing before the animation happens. So you can see that at the moment I'm dragging that there. You can see the opacity set much lower, and then that will resize to a particular area, so you can see the ghost of the div or the element before you actually decide to drag it, or before the user actually drags it. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be setting this value to 0 initially when the button has been clicked, and then we're going to just create a set interval timer which is going to gradually increase this value. And this obviously doesn't have practical applications, but it shows us what the progress bar will look like once it is in place, and actually has a real value to feed back to this widget. So just for now, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this line here, and I'm going to create a new variable called interval, and that's going to be equal to set interval, and inside here we have a function. So we pull this down. Now inside here is what's going to happen every X amount of seconds, and we define the seconds just after this here. So I'm going to do 50 milliseconds, which is obviously 0.05 of a second, and this is going to allow us to gradually increase this particular value every 50 milliseconds. So let's go ahead and update this value each time. So we're going to say val equals val plus 1. So that's going to increase the value here by 1 every 50 milliseconds. And then what we can do is go ahead and implement or put this into the value of the progress bar. So again, we we reference or select the progress bar div, and we use .progressBar as we did before. But this time we're going to go ahead and define a value in here which will be equal to val. And because it's equal to val, every 50 milliseconds this will increase by 1, and therefore the progress bar will constantly update with this updating value here, this variable val. So let's go ahead and test that out, and then we're going to go on to look at how to relay this back to the percentage. So when I click upload, you can see that that gradually increases all the way to the end. However, we do have a problem when it gets to the end. Now the percentage, the value is constantly increasing now. So